On October 25th, 2020, tournament organizer Robin Juggle Guy Harn announced that the latest entry in the Big House Tournament Series would take place this December. For those who don't know, the Big House is a tournament for the competitive video game Super Smash Bros. Melee, which was released almost 20 years ago today. Despite the game's age, the competitive scene is thriving, and the Big House regularly attracts thousands of in-person fans each year, and has been doing so for a decade. But this year was different. With COVID-19 forcing communities across the globe to stay at home, the Big House announced that this year's event would take place entirely online in order to protect its attendees and reduce the spread of the virus. Despite the game's immense popularity, Nintendo, the company that developed Melee, have made no efforts to re-release the game on a modern console, or to provide any way for fans to play the original game online. So to get around this, passionate Melee fans have spent literal years painstakingly coding and designing an alternative available on the PC so that fans can still play the game they love, even during a pandemic. In June this year, the PC-based platform named Slippy Online was released to the public and offered an online Melee experience that was superior to many fighting games released by AAA game studios. Somehow, against all odds, Melee players had found a way to still compete in a game that's almost 2 decades old, entirely on their own. Yesterday, on November 19, 2020, the Big House posted this message from their Twitter, explaining that Nintendo had sent the tournament organizers a cease and desist, forcing them to cancel the event. While this announcement shocked the community, it's only the latest entry in a long history of Nintendo deliberately suppressing the competitive scene, despite the community doing everything in its power to cooperate with Nintendo. The most well-known example was back in 2013, when Nintendo attempted to shut down the Melee event at EVO, the biggest fighting game tournament series at the time. It's worth noting that Melee was only in this event because fans of the game raised $94,000 for charity through a competitive fundraising initiative that went to breast cancer research. Fans of Melee were so passionate and wanted to see their game on the big stage so badly that they raised almost $100,000 for breast cancer, only to have Nintendo force the TOs to shut it down. As you can imagine, people weren't happy with this decision. Within the day, after enormous backlash from not just the community, but the general public, Nintendo reversed their decision and agreed to let EVO stream and run the Melee event. They recognized that shutting down a charity event for people who only want to play and compete in a game that they love was a bad look. EVO 2013 is the best known example, but for those in the community, it's the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 20 years, Nintendo publicly and privately have gone to great lengths to stomp out any effort the community has made to grow the game, while other developers regularly throw millions of dollars into promoting and developing a competitive esports scene. As these scenes often provide huge boosts in revenue and sales for the game itself, Nintendo does the opposite. Rather than actually supporting a community that would genuinely love to just give them money to develop a modern way to play the game, Nintendo doesn't seem to care. So when Nintendo released their statement on why they forced the Big House to cancel their event, it didn't surprise the community that the statement deliberately misrepresented Nintendo's contributions to the scene. Nor did it surprise us that Nintendo's description of Slippy Online itself wasn't entirely accurate either. Nintendo wants to appear to have supported tournaments for the game, but the reality is that this support is often just Nintendo allowing these events to take place, nothing more. They don't contribute to prize money, they don't do much of anything. The overwhelming majority of Smash tournaments are run by the community, but one of the few tournaments Nintendo did run on their own for the more modern title, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, literally had a controller as the first prize. In comparison, the prize pool for Dota 2's competitive tournament, the International, last year was around $35 million, with much of that money coming from the game's publisher, Valve. So yeah, Nintendo is really helping us out. Nintendo also wants to represent Slippy as an illegal mod that uses illegal copies of the game, but the reality is also more complicated. Slippy is run on an emulator, which is software that tries to emulate how the original console would run for use on a PC. I'm not a lawyer, but there have been cases in the past that have argued for the legality of emulators and have won. Because of this, many fans question whether or not Nintendo's claims would actually hold up in a court, believing instead that Nintendo is just using its tremendous financial resources to bully the scene, whether or not the law is actually in their favor. If you're interested in learning more about the legality around this situation, there's a link to the video in the description, but the TLDR is that this entire thing is more of a gray area than Nintendo makes it out to be. So why does all this matter? After all, if you're not a fan of Melee, one of your first thoughts might be, why don't they just play another game? While I could spend hours trying to convince you why we play, I'll try to sum it up in a few sentences. This game has had an active community for almost 20 years for a reason. People have devoted literally millions of dollars worth of time and money just to keep the game going because of how much they love it. The game is that good, so you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. A better question might be, why is Nintendo so interested in stopping us from playing in the first place? Imagine if an individual corporation owned the rights to a game like soccer and could literally force local teams to stop playing soccer even though all the teams wanted to do was play. Then imagine if the best soccer players in the world couldn't compete in community-run tournaments because the company that owns soccer just didn't feel like letting them play. This company could create a way for people to play soccer and even make money doing so, but they instead choose to spend their time actively shutting down soccer leagues around the world because they just really don't want people to play soccer, even though they're the ones who made soccer in the first place. This is what Nintendo is doing. I would argue that pushing back on decisions like this are important for a lot of reasons though. For one, decisions like this are the result of an outdated legal system not equipped to handle the complexities of modern gaming, and a corporate culture that uses its financial resources and power to bully communities from doing the things they love. One of the unfortunate realities of esports is that regardless of the legal uncertainty around things like emulation, publishers do have control over the broadcast rights to the games they own. So it's not just Nintendo that can shut down tournaments like this, it's any developer. By fighting that culture, we set a precedent and show companies that this behavior isn't just morally questionable, it's questionable from a business perspective too. If this happens, we're less likely to see this kind of pushback in the future. But there's also a much simpler reason. For a lot of people, myself included, Melee is a great escape from a global pandemic that the world hasn't seen in over 100 years. One of the best ways to reduce the spread of COVID is to stay indoors and distance yourself from others. Melee is a great way to do that, and our community found a way to play in spite of these barriers. So Nintendo's decision is bigger than one tournament. If Nintendo continues to send cease and desist letters to Melee tournament organizers for their online tournaments, the competitive scene might die by the time we play in person again. If Nintendo targets Slippy itself, there won't be any way to safely play Melee at all. I think a common misconception is that our community wants developer support from Nintendo, but we gave up on that a long time ago. Truth be told, veterans of the community just want Nintendo to stop pouring money and time into shutting down any efforts we make to grow this community. People also might think that because of all this, we hate Nintendo, but it's the opposite. We love Nintendo. We just want to be able to play their games. We're Nintendo's allies, not their enemies, and it's bizarre that Nintendo doesn't see it this way. So if you're not comfortable with the corporation punishing a community who just wants to play a game during a global pandemic, a game that they can only play in person on the original hardware, this raises another important question. What can you do to help? Well, the easiest thing you can do is just spread the word. Remember what happened in 2013. Nintendo reversed their decision after the public pushed back and allowed EVO to continue streaming Melee, and maybe this time they'll do the same thing. Already we've seen the hashtag #FreeMelee reach #1 on Twitter globally, and there's even been a new tournament announced where the entire prize pool will go to the charity of the winner's choice. Only time will tell if Nintendo will try to shut down that event too, but we want to show the world why our community is worth preserving. So let Nintendo know how you feel by tweeting at Nintendo of America. Show them that what they're doing isn't cool and spread the word. You can also share this video with friends and send this video to the media to get them to pick up this story. The bigger we can make this thing, the more likely we are to have Nintendo leave us alone. Because at the end of the day, that's all we want. We want to play the game we love, compete in the game we love, and not get COVID. We want Nintendo to leave us alone, and we want Nintendo to free Melee.